Aurora is a Women in Leadership programme developed for the higher education sector. And the university engages with the programme annually, and year on year we've increased the number of spaces available to colleagues, and now we're really building our internal Aurora network, which is fantastic. I'd just like to take a few minutes of your time to introduce the talk by Professor Elena Rodriquez-Falcon, the university's Deputy Vice-Chancellor. I'm Sarah Mills, I work within the Human Resources team, and in my role I have the privilege of working with many talented, inspiring women, and I was thinking actually every day, so I'm incredibly lucky, and Elena is one of those women. And we're delighted to have her here with us this afternoon, sharing her fascinating story. We're really looking forward to it. And so thank you, Elena, for giving your time this afternoon. Before we start, I just want to run through a few practicalities. So there's no fire alarm scheduled. So if it does go off, it's the real thing. And the fire exits, we would need to leave by the door, the entrance that we came in, turn right, and then follow the corridor down, all the way round and then out into the courtroom. The toilets are also, the ladies and the gents are also located on the same corridor. And following Elena's talk, we invite you all to stay for lunch. So there is such thing as a free lunch today. And lunch will be served just outside this room where you had tea and coffee. If you could please not bring any food into the reading room. We've been asked not to bring our food in here, so we'll eat out there in the corridor. And those of you that have given dietary requirements, my understanding is that they'll be plated separately for you. And if you've indicated that you're vegetarian, the buffet will be a mix of meat and vegetarian, so it's not a separate plate for vegetarians in the room. So practicality's over. This is a talk to mark International Women's Day and is the first in a new annual series by the university in collaboration with the Women's Network. And I just want to say a really big thank you to the Women's Network for organising this event, because I know how much effort has gone into this behind the scenes. Thank you also to colleagues in our communications team, and I particularly want to mention Ella. So Ella's starting, she's at the back of the room there, looking coy. Who's done a sterling job in promoting this event, hence why we've got so many colleagues and friends and partners here today. Also thank you to our operations team for the catering, digital services, for technical support, and I'm bound to have forgotten somebody, so apologies if I've forgotten you. So as I mentioned, this will become an inaugural event, so taking place around International Women's Day every year, and is named after Jessie Donaldson. You can see her there on the stands. An incredible woman with an incredible story. Jessie was from Swansea, moved to America in the 1800s, risking fines, prison sentences to operate a safe house for slaves escaping southern US states. And if you haven't had an opportunity to learn more about her remarkable story, her remarkable courage, I'd highly recommend you look her up. And actually we do have, I was doing some research prior to this, and there's a great press release on the university website and a video as well, which you can look at. And so moving from one inspiring woman to another, both disruptors in their own way, it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome Elena, a female mechanical engineer born in Mexico. Elena came to the UK 25 years ago, and she'll share her story with us this afternoon. Tell us about her transition into academia, becoming a disruptor, and what she's learned along the way. One of the most innovative leaders of engineering education reform in the UK. Please will you join me and give Professor Elena Rodriquez-Falcon a really warm welcome.
Diolch, Sarah. Brychawn da, dwi'n bach iawn o fod yma. I'm learning Welsh. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really, really happy to be here. And thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and the Women's Network for organizing this session, and to everyone who already has been mentioned, but particularly to you for being here today, and those who are listening. I really am very happy to be here today, celebrating the life of Jessie. And tomorrow is International Women's Day. And this year, we are focusing on embracing equity. And there is a hashtag, embrace equity. So embrace equity, get tweeting. We need to get our voices heard. Some time ago, I was in a meeting, and I mentioned in my conversation the phrase, what is the worst that can happen, which is something that I tell myself regularly. And I was talking to a colleague who said to me, this made a difference to me. And so I thought, well, perhaps today when I'm talking to you, just remembering that those experiences, those moments, important, memorable moments of my life, might hopefully give you a moment to reflect on your own lives. So I hope this conversation about my life is of help to you. So let me just get started, and you might be asking yourself, why do I have a picture of myself sitting on a map many kilos ago? Seriously, it is a map of the place where I was born, and I'll tell you more about that. And the reason I wanted to use that photo today is because I always want to remember my roots, but also because maps remind me of the fact that they help you get from one place to another. They guide you from one direction to another. And in my case, I get lost every time. So even with a map, I get lost. But certainly, I think this is the map of my life, what I'm going to share with you today. I am, as Sarah said, from Mexico, north of Mexico, Monterrey, big industrial city. I'm an only child born from working class parents who didn't have an opportunity to have an education. And therefore, they focused their lives really to give me the opportunities that they were not afforded. It's amazing because I grew up with things, hearing things like, you know, if you have a dream, follow it, you can do it, as long as you put your mind to it, if you work hard, if you treat people well, just don't let anyone treat you badly. Those were the things that I grew up with, and they have followed me through my life. I come from that industrial city, Monterrey, which is perhaps the most industrial city in Mexico, and one where if you think about doing a degree or following a career, the normal thing is to think, well, what kind of job can I get here? Just recently, I heard on the news that Tesla is setting up a multi-billion company there in Monterrey. It's that kind of place. So back in the late 80s, when I was thinking about doing a degree, I just thought, well, engineering makes sense. This is the kind of place where I can get a good job. It wasn't because I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't even know what engineering was, if I can be honest. So I just thought, I'll get a good job. And I happened to be good at maths and physics. So I thought, well, I'll do that. So I became the first person to go to university in my family. In the university, where I did my first degree, which was a mechanical engineering degree with business. It was a 5-year degree. That's just the way it was, long degree. It was a traditional degree, lots of maths, lots of physics, little to no application. And I just did what I was supposed to do. I met many people there. One of my friends had 7 siblings. I was an only child. They had a huge family, and I loved it. I used to go to her house a lot. And I met Oscar, one of her siblings. Oscar had a car accident when he was 20 years of age, and he broke his neck and lost movement from his neck down. He could only move his left hand a little bit, that one. In Mexico back then, I didn't get to see many people out and about with disabilities. It wasn't a thing. So when I met Oscar, it was just really different. He was a generous soul. He's passed away a few years ago, sadly. But he shared with me what it was to have a disability, and I understood a lot about it. But I also got to understand something really powerful, that actually engineering can help people's lives, which is something that I hadn't picked up from my degree. And his family, without knowing, they had devised ad hoc engineering artifacts, like a hand brace to help him eat, comb his hair, brush his teeth, things that sound familiar to some of you who do research in this area. And I was in love with that. And Oscar went on to be an inspiration and continues to be an inspiration. And I always mention him because you'll understand how he's impacted my life. But before I realized what engineering could do, I went on to work in industry. The first job I ever had was a job where I was, just wait for it, a supervisor of 200 blue-collar workers. And bear in mind that I was 23, the only woman, no work experience, and I was standing there with 200 men who just took the mick out of me. For 2 or 3 weeks, they just knew that I didn't know what I was doing. And I was so disappointed because I had graduated from engineering, but I wasn't an engineer. I knew that right there and then. And I am ashamed to say, I really am, that back then I thought it's because I did a degree in Mexico, and it's a developing country. It clearly, that's what it is. So I had to teach myself other skills to help myself learn to be an engineer. And I gained their trust, and we exchanged knowledge. They taught me how to use machines. I taught them how to do some simple calculations, and we saved tons of material and money, and things got better. But, of course, I just didn't know what was happening, why I wasn't a good engineer. Then, afterwards, I went on to work on a sort of big cement company, Cemex. You might have seen those things around. A food company, they made sausages. You really don't want to know how, seriously. And after that, I did what most women do in my country. I got married to one of my ex-classmates in Mexico. We both were very studious people, and we decided to come to the UK. He was going to do a PhD. I was going to do an MBA. And Sheffield, why Sheffield? People ask me why Sheffield. Well, if you're an engineer, Sheffield is kind of well known for its engineering, particularly in the universities. In the UK, well, you guys are famous around the world. And so it made sense. We had scholarships, so we came here. During the first 2 years of our stay there, I was doing my MBA and improving my English. It was really poor back then, still not very good, but back then I was struggling. So when I finished my MBA, I thought, well, I need to test how much I've improved my English. And it occurred to me that if I put myself under pressure, it would work. So if I applied for a job and I got a job interview, maybe I would see how well I had done. Well, the University of Sheffield in mechanical engineering were looking for someone with a mechanical engineering degree and a business background, and I had already 2 MBAs. Don't ask me why, I don't collect them. And anyhow, so they, to my surprise, not only they gave me an interview, but they gave me the job. And I was like, wow. So the job was to develop new engineering degrees with enterprise. In the 2000s, back then, some of you will remember that there were these science and engineering and enterprise centers around the UK, and there was the yw'r Center for Enterprise with Sheffield, Leeds, and York in that area. So they gave me that job. And during the interview, the head of department, who I'll tell you about in a minute, asked me a very curious question. He said, Elena, are you okay speaking in front of people? Which, to be honest, I'm not very well. I'm petrified in front of you. But I said, yeah, I suppose. I never thought he meant in English, first of all. And secondly, I never imagined that 2 weeks after I arrived, he would say, Elena, I need you to come to my office. There was this lecturer teaching on business planning, and she's left. And there is no other person qualified to teach business other than yourself. And I remember saying, I'm an engineer, I'm not an academic. And he said, tough. I said, okay, fine. I've recently seen Ian, his name is Professor Ian Patterson, at a ceremony where I was elected Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. And I helped him from the bottom of my heart because he helped me find my true vocation, education. Finally, I knew what I was meant to do. But the first weeks were absolutely horrendous. I didn't know what I was doing. We have people who teach how to teach. I really didn't know what I was doing. They left me piles of notes, and I was bored just reading them, let alone the students just listening to me. And in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, I didn't learn to be an engineer. Something needs to be done differently. So I just thought, well, I'll just do something different. And by the way, I discovered right there and then that my experience as an engineering student back in Mexico was no different to the experience of students in engineering at the University of Sheffield, which was a very well-known engineering department. And years to come, I would know that that's true anywhere we go. It is the way we educate that is challenging. Anyhow, so I told myself, if I need to do something different, the first question I need to ask myself, what do engineers do? Well, we solve problems. Whose problems? People's problems. How do we know what problems do they have? Well, we ask them. We define the problem. There are some engineers around the room here. Hopefully they'll agree with me. You set up the parameters. You understand what the situation is. Therefore, you are doing some market research. Once you understand that, you find different solutions and you evaluate them against that criteria. And then if it's financially viable, you can actually get it going. So in other words, you are writing a business plan. So I thought that makes sense to me. So I'll do that. So whilst I was doing my job, I was developing this sort of what I came to understand a new pedagogical approach. To me, it was just common sense, really, but it was back then a new pedagogical approach. Right now, you see it everywhere. And as it happened, I got to meet a family. You see here their son, Kieran Norton, was born with quadriplegic cerebral palsy. And like any other child, he wanted to do what other children did. He wanted to make a cup of tea for his granddad. He wanted to take photos. He wanted to be able to write, but because of his condition, he wasn't able to do that. And oh, this is not behaving. Tell me if he's not behaving. What are you doing? Just sitting there, not telling me. And I'm going here with all. Anyhow, so I said to the students, well, if he's got that problem, then you need to use your engineering skills to help make his life better. And do exactly what I said before. Understand the problem, come up with solutions, make sure it's financially viable, write a business plan for it. There you go. Job done. Learning outcomes met. Voila. By the way, does he remind you of anyone? Oscar, of course. There is no coincidence that I chose that family. To me, it was the opportunity, the first time that I had an opportunity to use that engineering skills to make a difference to someone. And it wasn't through me, it was through those students. Anyhow, I really was very happy because we did what we were supposed to do. What happened next, though, took me aback. The feedback that we got from the students was the best feedback that any academic had had in mechanical engineering at Sheffield back then. And I kept thinking, this is just common sense. Seriously, it is common sense. But not only that, more importantly than that, it was that those engineers because we can call them engineers because they actually were engineers, were able to demonstrate when they graduated to their employers that they were not engineering graduates, they were engineers. And there is a subtle but brutal difference, and I experienced that, and I didn't want them to experience something different. So I had come to develop new programs to Sheffield, and it was a one-year project. But after that, I was offered another year, and then another year, and then another year. And it was nearly 20 years later that I left Sheffield. They gave me the opportunity to carry on doing what I was doing and honing that skill, learning to be an educator, because I wasn't one. I had to teach myself, and I had to get training. But what you'll see here is a few examples of those projects. I'm not going to talk you through them. What I want you to see is that this was happening as well. There was a lot of press attention because that was so new back then in 2001, 2, 3, that kind of thing. And everyone was really interested in this type of education and what the engineers were doing for Sheffield, for the citizens of Sheffield. And therefore, I got a lot of attention as well as a person, as an academic. I had been to MIT to do an entrepreneurial development program. And then it occurred to me when I came back that if they had these ideas that were commercially viable, then they needed a place where they could exploit them, commercialize them, etc. And if my colleagues had a thermodynamics lab, I should have an enterprise lab. It just made sense to me. So I went to the head of the department, and he said, no. And I was like, OK. His tenure finished, coincidentally, and the next head of the department came. So I went to him, but this time I had a business plan, and I said, listen, we need an enterprise lab. This is really important. He said, why? I explained. He said, what do you need? And I said, some space. And he said, the only space we have is this corridor. Literally, it was a corridor like this. And I said, that'll do. Went, asked for help, donations, computers, asked IP lawyers, marketeers, people to help with professional advice, and was able to get the then Home Office Secretary, David Blunkett, to come and inaugurate my enterprise lab. It was a corridor. It was a corridor, really. David Blunkett, 2 weeks after that, had to step down. I don't know whether some of you remember. It wasn't because of me. I promise. I'm just joking. Anyhow, because he came, there was, again, lots of press attention, and the Vice Chancellor came to the corridor. Everyone came. And other students across the university started to come to mechanical engineering because they wanted to start their own businesses. And it was just weird that this was happening, and I didn't have any control of it, really. It was just happening. But because of that, the three White Rose universities were able to put a bid for the Centers for Excellence in Teaching and Learning for Enterprise, CETLs, they were called back then. I can't even remember, 2005 or something like that. And we won $4.5 million based on this idea. And we set up the enterprise zones at the three universities. In Sheffield, it was called University of Sheffield Enterprise. So I was doing very well, as you can see. Things were working out. I had found my true vocation. And yet, things were not going very well at home. And the truth is that as I began my married life, I realized very, very, very quickly that I had made a mistake. I did what any Mexican Catholic woman was supposed to do. I married in Mexico. There were not role models there. I came to the UK. And I realized that I had made a mistake. I realized that I was gay. And I was very foolish, very, very foolish back then, because I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to hurt the person I had married. I didn't want to hurt my parents or disappoint them. And so I stayed married for 8 years. And I can't tell you how difficult it was. after 8 years to find the courage from somewhere to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I let you down, I've been hiding who I am for all of these years, and we need to move on. And I'm grateful because the person I had married only wanted us both to be happy. So I was lucky in that way. But because my mom had suffered with, she had been diagnosed with a very serious mental health problem. A few years after I came to the UK, I didn't know how to tell them. So I called my dad instead. I normally would call my mom, but I called my dad. And the first thing he said was, is it going to affect your job? It was his first reaction, his first question. And I had never thought about it. It never occurred to me. I mean, I was really worried about other things. And suddenly it occurred to me, is it going to affect my job? And I really didn't know. We both had been at the same department. He did his PhD there. And my coming out wasn't a lucky affair, as normally would be. Everyone knew that we were getting divorced, and they knew why. And to my surprise, everyone was so very supportive. My colleagues, my friends, my family, everyone who knew me and knew us were very supportive. They just wanted us to be happy, and they wanted me to be myself for the very first time. Around that time, the director of HR, who was a gay woman herself, contacted me and said, like most HR sort of units, can we showcase yourself for diversity in the university? And I remember feeling this thing in my stomach and going, no, of course not. I mean, if I am going to be known, it's because of my work. It can't be because of who I am. I would change my mind in years to come, as you can see. So I was developing a reputation in the university for many reasons, mainly because of what I had been doing at work. I also had been asked to be director of inclusive learning and teaching between 2007 and 2011. And the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Engineering, Professor Mike Hounslow, asked me, well, he said, actually, we have a problem. We don't have enough women in engineering, either academics or students. And if 50% of the population are women, 50% of the engineers should be women. I've stolen his quote throughout the years because it is true. So I accepted to do this job. And I was really, I'm really proud of that work, to be honest. But the truth is that we made a dent. We did set up, I instigated actually the creation of the very first Women in Engineering Student Society in the UK. And many things were done during those years. And yet, there is so much to do. And tomorrow is International Women's Day. And I can see around this room, and I can see about 3 or 4 men in this room. This is not a woman's problem. Anything with diversity, minorities, minority groups, whatever minority group is not the minorities group problem. It's everyone's problem. We need to work together to rebalance society. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that because it matters. You can see this room here. It is the minority group that is here today, and so it's not right. We need to fix it, and we will. So Mike, this man here, great leader, one of the people that I'm most grateful to. He said to me, Elena, we need to support other diverse groups. I thought, great. He knows. And then he said, well, what should we do next? I had been reading in the Engineering and Technology magazine about the problems that LGBTQ people had in engineering. And that was in 2014. And so I said, what about sexuality in engineering? And he said, too quickly, actually. He said, no, we don't have a problem there. What about mental health? And don't get me wrong, because of my mom and my own personal experiences with mental health, I care about it, but it was just his reaction, his really, no, we don't have a problem there, that I thought, what do you mean? So I said, Mike, how many people in the faculty do you know that are from the LGBTQ community? Bear in mind that it was a 6,000 students and 2,000 members of staff, and he went, you? And I thought, so what do you think is happening? And I had read that about 1 in 5 people in engineering, in industry, or students, or in academia were from the LGBTQ communities. That's a huge, staggering stat. That was back then. So I think, I came out in 2006. This is 2014. My journey up to there has been an accident after another. I did tell you, my map, my journey, I get lost everywhere. Fortunately, many of those things were good things. But I had told to myself time and again, well, what is the worst that can happen? So I did things. And on this occasion, I told myself, what is the worst that can happen if I just take control? Thank you. What's your name? You are my friend now. Oh, what is the worst that can happen if I take control of my own narrative? Well, really, nothing bad happened. But I had asked myself, well, if people say something to me, I'll get over it. If it goes wrong, I'll learn from it. I won't do that again. I will do something different. And until this day, I ask myself that question all over again. But it was somehow, I think, my passion for education, for engineering, for enterprise, the work I did with women in diversity, shining the light on these areas personally, that I think gave me a platform to get some successes. When I reflect now, up to that date, up to around this time, I realized that most of what happened of this scale was after I came out, because I was me, because I was authentic, because I wasn't hiding who I wasn't scared anymore, I was just going for it. And I think that is a lesson for me, and I hope something for you to think about. When I received this award here, specifically that one, it was about excellence in teaching from the Royal Academy of Engineering, a very handsome award, by the way. I won't tell you how much, but it was. It helped with various things. Professor Paul White, who was a mentor, and mentors are very important. Use mentors, find mentors. Even if you don't know who, if there is someone that you think they are where I want to be, go to them. It's important. He said to me, let's have lunch to celebrate that you got an award. And in the conversation, he said something like, when you are a professor, Elena, and I stopped listening afterwards. I seriously didn't know what he was saying. The only thing that I had heard was, when you are a professor. And I was completely speechless. That doesn't happen to me very often, I promise. My partner says it's because I'm an Aries. I don't know whether that's true or not. But I normally don't, I'm not lost for words. I left that meal, and I remember exactly where I was. I can see it in my mind's eye. I was West Street in Sheffield when I thought, he thinks I can be a professor. But how can I be a professor? I am not even a real academic. I came from industry. I had a professional standing because of the work that I had done, but it was in education. And the university didn't, and I was a senior university teacher. That was a thing, a teaching track. But when you go to senior university teacher, there wasn't a next step. And so there wasn't a way for me to be a professor. if you don't ask, you don't get. So it wasn't easy, trust me. It must have been about 2008 when I had that conversation with Paul, because it was until 2012 that I became a professor. I submitted my first application, and the department, like that, said no. They were not accustomed to getting applications from people like me, not traditional academics. And I said, why not? Just give me some feedback. And I realized that the feedback was two types of feedback. One was feedback that I could do something about, and then there was the one that I couldn't do anything about, which was outside my control. And I could have said, okay, I won't ever get it. But then I told myself, what is the worst that can happen if I try again? That they say no, well, I'll learn something from it, and maybe, just maybe, I'll get a bit closer. So I applied again the following year, and the department said no. So this time I said, but why not? And they said, well, you're not a research-intense engineering academic. I said, but you want me to be an educator. Why are you punishing me for not being what you are not asking me to be? The faculty, not just the department, the faculty began to wonder the same thing. And why if an individual who's got this standing, this sort of visibility, is not able to progress? And Sir Keith Burnett, who was the Vice Chancellor, Welshman as well, he said, Elena, what's going on? Why are you not a professor? And I said, well, there is no way for me to be a professor. So he said, let's work together with HR, and we are going to see what we can do. And we created a track for people who focus on learning and teaching. And I applied for the third time, and the department said no again. And I realized that there were pockets of the institution that were not ready. They were antiquated. They were still focusing on what scholarship meant in the current era. Because as Sir Keith said to me, the real meaning of scholarship is education. That's how it all began. Those of you who are educators know that. The most recent definition of scholarship is the one that is research-intensive one. Anyhow, but the third time the department said no, I said, well, sorry, I do meet the criteria this time, so I'm going to self-submit. So I self-submitted to the faculty, and they straight away said, yes, you meet the criteria, passed it to the university panel, and they said, yes, you meet the criteria, and they sent it out to externals. And I was stuck again. Because, of course, that was a research-intensive university, and the other externals were from research-intensive universities, and the sector was not ready yet. So the university, the following year, final time, I got there, everyone said yes, and this time HR sent the criteria to the externals. And I feel very proud about that, because I think somehow that helped create a ripple effect with other universities who started to think about these tracks. And finally, in January 2012, I was one of the first 4 people at the University of Sheffield to be promoted to professor in the track of education. And I really am proud of that. And not just because I was 39, I was actually quite young, but because it opened the doors to so many others in years to come to achieve those things, and it never had happened before in a university like that, for people who are committed to their students, to education. And I regularly think, we forget in universities what our main purpose of existence is. We are here to equip our young people and learners of all ages to have the skills to be able to be successful in their lives, whatever they decide to do, whatever journey they decide to follow, and to make a change. We are here to create those experiences through our research and knowledge creation, but also through those experiences in education. So I've had the honor to go around the world talking about this, and particularly asked in some countries to help review some of the provision and how they did do these things. And because I was doing that, I thought, well, I'll do a little exercise just to understand myself what it means in practice for engineering and technologies, particularly to develop an educational sort of provision. And I did an exercise with staff and students and went around asking them very, very simple questions. First question I asked them was, what is learning? I mean, not what is teaching, what is studying, but what is learning? And I know that you're going, oh, is this, is that. Whatever you think is learning, then how do you learn best? Caroline, you know all of this. But the most important two questions is, how do you know that you have learned? At what moment in time you go, oh, I get it. I know, that's what it is. And how I can know that you got it. How can I know that? Is it through an exam, really? And when does the learning matches the mark, the grade closest? And what I found is fascinating. All around the world, in different languages, in different continents, I found the same thing. They all say that education should be about learning, not just simply about teaching, and that it should be about ensuring that learning has taken place. It's happened. It's not just about grades or assessment. It's happened somehow. They said that open-ended and ill-structured sort of challenges are the best way of observing learning and the better pedagogical approach. That's when you know, when you see someone doing the doing, explaining the explaining, that you know that someone has learned. That's how you can see the evidence. That's how you know that you've learned yourself. That is as important to have partners, learners as partners in that co-creation of the educational experience. And using technology matters, but not as a replacement for the learning experience itself. And the final thing that I learned in that process was, and it's instinctive actually, that if you contextualize the learning and you make it real to the learner, then it works better. It has to be authentic. And that's the kind of thing that I had been doing instinctively, bringing projects to the students. It made sense. So it was kind of like something that was helping me understand my own journey, but in that process, helping them to develop their own provision. In Sheffield, I had done as much as I could with my own practice. The university had embedded as much authentic learning as it was ever going to, because it's a very rigid institution. Don't get me wrong, amazing institution, but rigid. And I often would hear myself saying, if I could only start my own university, I would. And guess what? In 2017, someone called me and said, Elena, there's a group of people who want to start a university from scratch in Hereford. And I said, where? Never heard of Hereford in my life. But they said, and they are aligned with your pedagogical thinking. Listen, I had come to the UK for a couple of years. And 20 years later, I was doing well, I was happy, I was myself. But how many people get ever asked to be part of creating a new university from scratch? I can tell you, not many. So I packed my bags, and I took the advice from a wise man who said to me that the opportunity of the lifetime has to be taken during the lifetime of the opportunity. And I left Sheffield with much pain in my heart, because it had seen me grown, cried, become who I was. And I thought I was resilient. I had no idea. I really had no idea. There is so much I can tell you about the Hereford University project, and I won't bore you because I've already been going on for a long time. And packing my life in less than an hour is very hard. So I've done as best as I could. But the one thing I want to tell you is that this project that ended up being called the New Model Institute for Technology and Engineering, NMITE for short, was funded by government to disrupt education. Not just engineering education, but education. It was an experiment. Can we create something with a blank piece of paper and see whether universities will get the wriggle on and will see themselves? That's what it was, really. So we did everything that we were asked to do. To me, this was a dream, really. An educationalist given a blank piece of paper to do exactly what I've been wanting to do. What I hadn't realized is a blank piece of paper is also very blank, really blank. If you look around any university, you need to think about the infrastructure, the processes, the systems, HR, well, you name it. Everything has to be put in place before actually you get going. And none of that had occurred to me. I just wanted to do this. But anyhow, so we did all of that, and we also did what really mattered. We created an engineering sort of provision that integrated engineering concepts with liberal subjects. That was really good fun to do, bringing sociology, psychology, history into engineering. We accelerated an MH program that normally takes 4 years into 3, so we saved the students a year of costs, but also we got those engineers faster into industry, which companies were telling us they needed. We had to bring interdisciplinary educators. There wasn't a faculty of engineering, a faculty of arts, a faculty of design. They were all together. And that's how it needed to work. And it was all about learning how to learn. But because most stakeholders, particularly the 400 companies that we talked to understand what the problem was, remember, that's how you solve a problem, they had said to us, we need world-ready engineers. That's what we need. And therefore, we thought, well, how do you provide an authentic learning? Well, you get them to learn in an authentic manner. 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 46 weeks of the year, only 2 or 3 weeks holiday in the summer. And they'll learn by doing as if you were at work with projects that a company or a social partner or a community partner would provide for a month. They were called sprints. And at the end, you would have a solution. It would progress, and it would advance through the years. By the time those engineers graduate, they would have done 20, 22 projects with different partners, and they will be engineers. Trust me, there is absolutely no doubt in my heart that they will be engineers. And they will demonstrate that with portfolios. There is no exams, no point in them. They don't measure learning in any ways that is meaningful. But if you see that someone has created a design, a solution, an industrial project, a prototype, a business plan, then you can see what learning has actually taken place. And it was about teamwork and collaboration and really in authentic spaces. Now, creating NMITE was amazing. I spent 5 years there. And it was everything that you could imagine and much more. But it was also a startup institution with all the problems of a startup, financial compliance, expectations from stakeholders, government on the back of us seeing what needed to happen, legal, everything. So during those 5 years that I was at NMITE, I didn't sleep very much. I always felt that weight of responsibility because it was a fragile organization. So when in 2021, after funding problems, after COVID, after all of these things, we received the pioneer cohort and we funded, we founded this organization. I was so relieved. I mean, it was just, I can't tell you how excited and how proud I felt. Of course, for Enmight, that was just, that the journey was just starting. During the years that I was at Enmight, I had the opportunity to represent the university very widely, the institution very widely. And I was personally recognized quite a lot, actually, during those years. I got a recognition as the Woman of the Year by Every Woman, Distinguished Mexican in the UK by the government in Mexico, Fellow of the IET and other things. But also, I was featured in, I mean, from Nature to what's this called, Woman magazine. And you know, I'm showing you this because this is one of the things that we don't do very well. Women or men, we don't do it very well. We had a conversation, Greg and I, about this. It is very challenging to put yourself out there and to be visible and to say, okay, I'll be in every single media channel that is available or presents itself. But I promise you that whilst I'm here, I will help because it not only will make a difference to you, it will make a difference to your profession, to the students, to the university. Someone said to me, if you don't communicate it, it doesn't exist. I mean, that's so powerful. That's one of the most powerful messages that I've ever had. And I really want to help you to communicate it because otherwise it doesn't exist. Of course, occasionally the headline is much more dramatic than the story itself. And seriously, that I wasn't expecting. But the reality, I mean, every time I see it, I just think, oh my God. But I got dozens and dozens and dozens of messages from people around the world saying, I want to go to your university because there I could be myself. And you know, never thought that was going to happen. After I saw it, I was like, oh, Christ, my mom is going to see this. But anyway, so it's important. It's very, very important. And of course, it also helps you with more serious things like being recognized. And I mentioned that I was made fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, which of course is a great honor. It's a pinnacle for any engineer. And particularly if it's about education in engineering. I mean, that really means a lot. But as proud as I am of that, and as proud as I was of leading the creation of a new university from scratch, one of the things that I wanted to share with you today is that leaders often don't say when you are tired, when you've reached your limits. One of my earlier bosses who I admire very much, every time I said, hello, how are you? He used to say, I'm splendid. Splendid. And there was nothing. He always said, I'm splendid. And I said one day, are you really splendid? You seem to be splendid all the time. I'm not. And he said, well, no, but that's what I have to show at work. And I told you that I believe that it's important to be true to yourself. And I had truly reached my limits. I just didn't have any more to give in my previous job. And to me, it was important to recognize that whilst I believe that resilience is like a muscle. I told you earlier, I thought I was resilient when I left Sheffield, had no idea. I now believe resilience is like a muscle. You exercise it, you get better at it, you exercise it, you get better at it. If you over-exercise it, it hurts, and it hurts a lot. So I am stronger, of course I am, but I also know what my limits were. And when another opportunity of the lifetime came to join an institution where transforming education and transforming lives is actually the mission itself. I mean, that's the mission itself. I had to come here, and I had to join this institution that after 200 years is willing to think about it, is willing to challenge itself. And I have had nothing but support from colleagues and people around the university who are open to saying, well, what can we do? How can we do this differently? Can we do it better? And open to new ideas. And I'm incredibly grateful. Because, of course, when you are a dreamer like I am, you need that kind of encouragement. And I really want to thank you all and people who are listening for being so welcoming to us. And now my partner Tracy and I can call Wales home since Friday. I live in Carmarthen, yay! You have no idea. It's been a long time coming. Of course, there'll be many challenges, but I do believe a challenge is an opportunity, and I know that we together can embrace them and learn from them and transform the university and make a change. After all, what is the worst that can happen? Thank you very much. That took a bit longer than I expected, but please, if you have any questions, just, I know. I just summarized 51 years in an hour. But go on, come on.
What's your plan for this university?
What's my plan for this university? Oh, I should have prepared for that, shouldn't I? I think that there are, I don't have a plan. I'll start with that. I think the plan has to be something that we come up with together, because otherwise it won't happen. I'll be imposing something. But what I can say is that I think it is important for us to remember, I mean, mission statements like that are in every university. That's the truth. Okay? But I do believe that there is a passion in this institution for education, and that's my passion. So if you ask me, I want to work with everyone across the university to see how we can transform really education and lives, and not just by a statement, but that every one of our graduates feel like a professional, not like a graduate of. That's what I would like to do. So plan in progress.
I'll ask a question. You've been really open and honest and quite vulnerable in your presentation today. And in terms of an organisational culture, to be that, for everybody to feel that they can be that open and honest and vulnerable, it requires a culture that supports that, and I just would like to know your thoughts in terms of how you feel you can help this organisation move towards that position.
Thank you, Caroline. A very important question. Back when I was in Sheffield, I told you I was horrified to make myself vulnerable, but I did realize that it does start with the leadership taking the first step. I wasn't a leader back then, but I am today, and I am here, and this I hope you all believe is the start of, I'm not saying it hasn't been, but at the start, at least in my tenure here at UWTSD, where we can all talk honestly. I would be very, very, very heartbroken if anyone felt they couldn't be themselves and they couldn't say, this is what is bothering me, I have an idea. Listen, we all are going to make mistakes. If you are a disruptor or someone who likes to innovate, the first thing I have to tell you is that we are going to make mistakes. I mean, it sounds like I'm amazing, doesn't it? But let me tell you, I have a box, a literal box and a digital box, where I keep everything that I ever applied for. And 75% of the things that I applied for, there were no's. That story is 25%. And I believe that if we try, and again, we'll make mistakes, but we'll get there. Even if people tell us no, not again, well, we'll try something different. Maybe we will be able to transform the university into a university that has a more open culture. Now, this audience, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 men in this audience. Not good enough. We are going to change that. And thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. You're all hungry. Yes.
What advice would you give 18-year-old Elena?
What a question. 18-year-old Elena had no idea of who she was. I didn't know what to study. I followed the environment, and the environment was the city, the culture, the religion, the family. If I was back then, I would say to myself, just don't be afraid, just explore a bit, just have a go at understanding other things. I was very diligent. I always wanted to make my parents proud. And I think that can be a good thing, but it also can stop you from finding yourself. I was 36 when I came out. So I would say to myself, just have a go. What's the worst that can happen? You're done? Well, thank you so much. Let's eat. Now I can eat. This is over.